right. I think we can go ahead and get started, folks. Really appreciate everyone in attendance here, both panelists and attendees. My name is Jonathan Gaston Falk. I'm staff attorney with the Student Press Law Center. We're right now in the midst of our Student Press Freedom Day week, and we have a variety of programming that you're able to tune into, including and especially tonight's event. We always want to hear from the students themselves. That's why we're here. Because we are celebrating this fighting for our rights as part of our Student Press Freedom Day 2025. So thank you for joining us today. A little bit about SPLC. So for those of you who might be unfamiliar with what we do, so we exist solely to provide free legal help for student journalists, both high school and college, sometimes younger than that, and their advisors related to free legal help information and training for all who approach us, including administrators. If you're an administrator on the call, welcome as well. We want to make sure that we're educating every possible rung of the ladder. And we're the only legal nonprofit in the US specifically focused on protecting the rights of student journalists. That's our sole focus. And so we're hoping to hear from you today. If you have some questions, certainly for the panelists, if there's a legally born question, I might jump in as well, but certainly our free legal hotline there is splc.org, legal help. That is our free legal hotline for you. No question is too small. Really want to hear from you. So this is the 8th year for Student Press Freedom Day. I've been with the SPLC for 3 years, so I'm just a baby where this stuff is concerned. We organize each year, and for all of us, we want to do a variety of things, including bringing attention to the important role that student journalists play in their communities, like these fine folks here, the panelists who've agreed to be here today are fine exemplars of that. We want to be able to highlight the challenges that they face from censorship or otherwise, whether it's legal threats of libel or copyright infringement. The pros get to rely on a lovely cabal of attorneys, waiting in the shadows to help out the pros as they're broadcasting. Student journalists don't get that. And so, if they approach us, that's really helpful. But they not always know about us, certainly. But we want to be able to take steps to address those challenges, whether it's through conversations like these or otherwise, and advance student press freedom as we're highlighting this week. And we also have some tremendous sponsors who make Student Press Freedom Day possible. We'd like to thank them here today for their support of student journalists. These are tireless sponsors, and we really appreciate their ability to keep our work going and the function that we provide here. So, but today we get to hear from these fantastic speakers who were high school seniors in Lawrence, Kansas. They realized their school's new AI-powered monitoring tool could put their reporting materials, including confidential sources and stories in progress, are not actually published yet, in the hands of administrators or third parties even before administrators, having these stories be deleted, having their photos be deleted in advance of, again, ever pressing publish. So, but they educated themselves as far as how this stuff worked. Their board of education did certain things, whether it was in closed session or open, and these students did what student journalists do best. They investigated how the stuff was working, and they not only did that, but they took the next step, which we don't always see with student journalists. They self-advocated. They reached out to us. They wanted to take the next step in order to change these processes that were going to hamstring a lot of what they were doing as student journalists. And we can all learn from this and the importance of learning about AI tools, brand new technology. They didn't understand it at first. We didn't either. We learned together. Or any other threat to student press freedom as it comes technologically or otherwise. So I'm really proud to turn it over to these very enterprising students. We have with us tonight Natasha Torkzaban, Morgan Salisbury, and Jack Tell. Folks, take it away.
Right. Let me share my screen here. The slide's going.
Okay. 1 second. Perfect. Okay, first off, I want to introduce myself. I'm Natasha Torkzaban. I was a senior at Lawrence High School. I'm currently a first year student at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern, and I'm studying journalism and legal studies.
Yeah, I'm Jack Tell. I was also a senior with this crew last year at Lawrence High School in Lawrence, Kansas, and I'm now at Westmont College in Santa Barbara, California, studying engineering.
And I'm Morgan Salisbury. I was a editor for the budget last year at Lawrence High School, and I'm now studying journalism and political science at the University of Kansas.
So we're going to kick this off by showing a slideshow that we showed our district officials expressing our concerns. This is the slideshow, minus a few edits for relevancy, that this essentially just spearheaded our advocacy to our school district. We created this at the beginning of our fight in order to lay out and explain our concerns. Also, we'd like to make note that throughout this presentation, we included images and reporting that could be compromised by Gaggle. For example, here on the right, there is a 2015 cover of the Budget, which was our school newspaper, that reported on pornography and teenage sexual expectations.
All right. So we came at this at first from a student journalism perspective. We recognized that Gaggle, this AI software, was scanning our work, and we knew that we had rights as student journalists, and we wanted to protect those from AI. And so we first presented to our district just kind of to give them a legal understanding as best we could of the issues that were at play. So one of those things is the Kansas Student Publications Act. Now, this, for all you out there, is a piece of legislation that's known as New Voices legislation, and there's actually similar laws like this in 17 other states around the country. This New Voices legislation uh, is not only in Kansas, so this might be applicable to wherever you are from. But this is what we explained to them. So we told them the Supreme Court did limit First Amendment rights in schools in Hazelwood v. Kuhlmeyer, which some of you I'm sure are familiar with. It said schools can limit speech disseminated under its auspices. And so this means that schools theoretically can limit and monitor speech. And however, Kansas passed a law to restore those protections to high school student journalists like us, like we were last year. And so we went on to explain how this law works. So the law says the liberty of the press and student publications shall be protected. And here's how that law protects students like us and you guys. Administrators can determine the length, number, and format of publications. They can review material to ensure it's consistent with high standards of English and journalism. And material that's libelous, slanderous, or obscene, or that commands, requests, induces, encourages, commends, or promotes conduct that's defined by law as a crime isn't protected. But other than that, and this is the key part, students are solely responsible for determining their content. And so we told our administrators this, and we told them that our district has historically been very protective of our rights. Like we've had certainly lots of protections that have been granted to us as part of the LHS budget, and we just wanted to make sure that that continues. So students are responsible for determining the content of their publications regardless of politics or controversy. And this matters, and this is for all student journalists. This matters because we strive to provide honest, uncensored reporting, and this law allows us to do reporting that we feel is important without worrying about outside influence. And from the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, they say be vigilant and courageous about holding those with power accountable, give voice to the voiceless. The same idea as sunlight is the best disinfectant. If we can talk about these issues that are important and uplift people who don't have voices, that's how we're going to solve these issues, these important issues in our schools. So it's important that we can do student journalism effectively without fear of monitoring or censorship. So, critically, the law does not contemplate prior review of work before it's ready for publication. And this is what Gaggle was doing in our school. Gaggle is scanning all of our work. You can read about it on the lhsbudget.com if you want to know the full story. But this AI tool was scanning everything that we did even before we published it on our website. And so district and school administrators had access to our confidential quotes, sources, interviews, story drafts before they were published. And so when we were writing about sensitive topics, we did not want school administrators to have access to those prematurely.
Yeah, so another big part of our conversation that Jack talked about was essentially protecting the work product of journalists and protecting our reporting process. So for journalists, unpublished notes are essential, and some of them may contain anonymous interviews that are often necessary components of sensitive stories. They may include confidential sources, and if those are exposed, it could critically impair our ability to continue to do good reporting. They could also include some information that is not intended to be published and should not be exposed to the outside world. Without trust, potential sources will not come forward, and that would be like not doing well with the reporting process. So this is a case that Jack and I reported on earlier this year. I believe Morgan actually made this graphic. So this is about the Marion County record raid. This is when police seized computers and other technology from a Kansas newsroom, and it sparked national outrage. During this, police eventually returned all the materials, and the police chief resigned following the incident. The city has still been sued, and a $235,000 settlement was reached. This was a clear violation of the Kansas Shield Law in the professional world, and these issues are critical. So this also emphasizes the fact that protecting journalists' rights is not just about preventing censorship, it is also critical to protect the reporting process. So a little more about Kansas Shield Law. Kansas Shield Law, essentially, it's this law to protect journalists' notes and sources from being revealed. We believe this applies to us because the Budget is an online journal in the regular business of news gathering and disseminating news or information in the public. And the Student Press Law Center has made it clear to us that this law should apply to the student journalists in Kansas, and it should protect us from having our work scanned.
And again, one note on that slide, other states have similar shield laws, and so that should apply pretty widely. And so these are the kind of arguments that you can use if you're trying to have a legal understanding of what's going on in the situation.
So this is not a new issue, student press rights being supported in the courts, and this certainly isn't something that's like foreign to the media. So the courts generally are very supportive of student press rights, and the Kansas Student Publications Act particularly has been tested in court in the Kansas Supreme Court, and it held up very well. In Students versus Shawnee Mission School District in 2018, a Shawnee Mission North administrator took a camera from a student covering a protest. The ACLU argued that the district prevented students from engaging in First Amendment activities. And it didn't matter. The issue, eventually the camera was given back. The photos that the student took were given back to the student. It didn't matter that the district owned the cameras or that the action didn't stop the students from eventually publishing their work. The ACLU successfully argued that students had been restrained from taking part in protected First Amendment activity. So just like that, even though the district owned our devices, owns current devices that students have, and owns Google Drive, that doesn't give it the ability or the right to review our journalistic products. So it's a lot less of the time about the final product, what can finally go out. So even though it's really important to emphasize that even though the photos went out, the camera was returned to the student, the fact that the district intervened in that process is what made that unconstitutional and what violated the free press rights. There's another important law to contemplate here, which is the Federal Privacy Protection Act of 1980. It prohibits the search of newsrooms by law enforcement and other government officials. And it's another thing that's supposed to that's given to journalists to safeguard their reporting process. So Congress has recognized, I mean, this is in the First Amendment too, but Congress continues to recognize that there's a privacy interest and not just the right to a free press, but also specifically the right to a privacy, the right to private journalism work product. So the whole process of doing journalism is protected rather than just the finished product. This law makes it illegal to search files, notes, or any reporting material, which Gaggle is equivalent to doing a 24/7 raid on our journalism work product, which is an obvious issue.
Yeah, and so this is companies like Gaggle and GoGuardian. The software has been in the news lately. It's only becoming more prevalent in schools across the country, and lots of times you'll hear reporters, administrators, anyone in charge talking about how something called the Children's Internet Protection Act gives districts the ability to monitor what's going on their computers, on their students' computers. But one thing that we pointed out to our district, that it's clear to us that SEPA, which was created more than 2 decades ago in 2000, was not meant to require such invasive and proactive monitoring. SEPA was created to prevent children from accessing harmful online material, mainly pornography. It didn't contemplate at all the idea of scanning student work. And this quote sums it up nicely. Not having control over documents doesn't constitute a violation of SEPA any more than not having control over pen and paper makes spiral bound notebooks a violation of SEPA. SEPA was created in 2000 in the era of the Yahoo search engine at Right, and it hasn't been updated since 2011. So SEPA was never written to apply to this sort of monitoring that companies like Gaggle and GoGuardian engage in.
And then this isn't the rise of these ed tech companies that are scanning students' devices. This is not something that's gone unnoticed by Congress or people in the government. So three United States Senators, Elizabeth Warren, Richard Blumenthal, and Edward J. Markey, in a 2021 letter to the CEO of Gaggle, wrote specifically, quoted, "We are concerned these products may extend far beyond the direction in federal laws to monitor online activity to protect children from exploitation and abuse. SEPA, which Congress passed in 2000, requires schools and libraries that receive federal funding to filter and monitor online activity to prevent children from accessing material that is, quote, harmful to minors. Many education agencies use this law to justify the use of technologies such as yours. However, while your company claims to protect students from harmful content, we are concerned that your company's products may extend beyond the intent of SEPA to serve to surveil student activity or reinforce biases." And it's really important to mention whenever school districts or administrators bring up SEPA, SEPA was purely intended to prevent students from accessing material that already exists. It does not at all contemplate, and I think Jack touched on this, it does not at all contemplate actively monitoring students to see what they're creating. It's purely supposed to be a blocking mechanism. School districts already implement this, prevent you from accessing porn websites or online games, a lot of times social media, those types of things. It never, ever contemplated monitoring. And it was passed in the 90s, a super long time ago. So it really does not at all think about that. The letter continues, because of the lack of transparency, many students and families are unaware that nearly all of their children's online behavior is being tracked. When students and families are aware, they are often unable to opt out because school-issued devices are given to students with the software already installed, and many students rely on these devices for remote or at-home learning. While some students are able to avoid constant monitoring of their online activity by using personal devices, this is a luxury that not all students and families are able to afford.
Yeah, so at the beginning, I talked a little bit about how these images on the right were pictures of reporting that Gaggle would have and could have impacted. And so this is a story that the budget wrote in 2018 that explored if the district was meeting legal obligations to notify teachers who had students with violent histories in their classroom. The story mentioned topics like sexual assault and violence, so it seems likely that it would be flagged by Gaggle. It included anonymous interviews from teachers who were critical of the district's handling of the issue. And if we wrote that story today, it is very possible that the district administration could be legally required to view our notes and anonymous interviews, which would both compromise our integrity as journalists and our ability to provide anonymous sourcing. This would cause massive conflicts of interest regarding this admin-teacher relationship. And just about the story, it won the Quill and Scroll International Writing Photo and Multimedia Contest as a news story. Doing this outstanding work was only possible because of our assurance of the privacy of our notes and sources.
Yeah, so here's a hypothetical about what this could have looked like. So in November 2023, there was an incident at LHS that involved a pellet gun being brought to school. No one was hurt. The gun was off campus, but the school was placed under a lockdown. So there was a story written following this incident, and during the reporting process in the story, the reporter talked to several teachers about how they felt school administration handled the situation. They all agreed our principal, Dr. Riles, handled it very well, but there's a situation here, there's another timeline where he did not handle it well. Something went wrong, but administration could have read that reporting if Gaggle flagged all the mentions of violence and guns, which it would have, and they could have potentially read criticism of themselves that was meant to be confidential, which clearly compromises the ability of sources to speak candidly with our reporters. So this is why these laws exist, to prevent these type of hypotheticals from happening entirely. This is a completely realistic scenario that almost could have happened.
Yeah, and so this is.
Sorry,
Oh,
Jack.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think these are, like Morgan talked about how these are really important. as far as understanding that our relationship with our district administration or our building administration was very good at the time. And so it's still amazing, but it's essentially if we had not had that relationship and if they had acted differently in the situation, we would not have been assured these protections that we would if we weren't using the software.
Yeah. So hopefully this overview of kind of the laws and why those laws exist has been helpful. Even back, this was nearly a year and a half ago now, we had this slide that we showed our district administrators about the Student Press Law Center. We talked to Mike Heisen on the phone, and he said that he's very concerned with what I'm hearing about their implementation of Gaggle in the context of student media, and this is something we take very seriously. So this slide is just kind of an example of how SPLC can be super helpful for high school students, journalism advisors, and even administrators. So we really appreciate the work that they do, and it was very helpful when we were working on this case during our senior year.
Yeah, so as far as gathering support, I'm going to give a little bit of background here. Many of you guys might be familiar with the case where in 1969, the Supreme Court said a Des Moines school district had violated the rights of Tinker, her brother, and others when it suspended them for wearing black armbands to school. And since then, black armbands have nationally symbolized student protests for First Amendment violations. And essentially, concerns that our legal rights were being violated were promptly dismissed during our first meeting with the district. David Cunningham, an attorney with the Kansas Associations of School Boards, told us he didn't believe our arguments had merit and that other students had not faced the same issues. This prompted us to take our battle public, demonstrating to our district the support that we had gathered, and at least 320 students, teachers, and staff at Lawrence High and Free State, the other high school in our town, wore black armbands in support while we met with district administrators. So this is a picture of us cutting those black armbands the day before or 2 days before getting ready to pass them out. Also, fun fact for this meeting, despite having printed out and placed informational handouts at each and every district administrator's seat, one individual actually criticized the armbands and said that something along the lines of saying it was insensitive of us to equate this with the Vietnam War. And in that moment, we responded and reminded them that Tinker did not go to the Supreme Court for the Vietnam War, but rather because her First Amendment rights were violated. Later, we had the privilege of talking with Mary Beth Tinker herself, and we actually told her, and she found that quite humorous. So this was just another moment and just another reminder of the obstacles that we had faced up to that moment. And as far as new updates since then, this slideshow was just the start of everything. We presented it at our very first meeting with all the district officials. And since then, we had several subsequent meetings. The district eventually agreed to exempt journalists from scanning on our Google Drives. And since then, our concerns with Gaggle have broadened and our argument has strengthened. After new information coming out about AI and how these different ed tech companies are functioning, we have decided to continue our battle and we continue to work with students who are being monitored to remove Gaggle from schools.
Yeah, so that's about the end of our presentation. And so now is the time for you guys to ask questions either about what we've just presented or any questions that you have that are particular to your own situations. If you have legal questions, I know we have some resources here to answer those as well. So yeah, go ahead, put some questions in the chat and we can answer those as they come.
Yeah, thank you all. And hi, everyone. I'm Josh Moore from the Student Press Law Center. While people type in their questions in the chat, I'm just curious if you could talk just a little bit more about how you got your student body kind of behind you. You said 300 plus students wore the armbands. How did you kind of activate your fellow students to support you?
Yeah, so I think at the beginning, like I said, one of the attorneys there had actually said to us, like, oh, the other high school in town doesn't have this problem. And I had actually just transferred from that other high school a year prior. I was very connected with them, and they had been going through issues of their own, going through a bunch of different journalism advisors, and they were kind of regaining their footing in this process. And so whenever we heard that comment and whenever we felt like our concerns weren't being taken seriously because we were getting faced with this criticism about, oh, this is just between you four, these issues don't exist elsewhere. We went to Free State and we presented that slideshow. Actually, we explained to them our situation. We went to different classrooms throughout the school, presented and explained to them that situation too. We posted on social media. We talked to everyone, honestly, like everyone, like in our community, like we were talking to about this, and they were talking to us and asking us how it worked, what the problem was, and how they can support it. So, yeah, we're very lucky to have a really supportive community that also joined us in our fight.
Yeah, and we literally went door to door in the school, each classroom, handing out armbands and explaining what they were for. And so that's how we got that student body support. So
That's fantastic. How enterprising to bring all of those students into this conversation, teaching other people about press freedom, which is just like precisely what Student Press Freedom Day is all about. So I love it so much. And the fact that you got Mary Beth Tinker involved is just icing on the cake. So we do have a few questions coming in. This first one is about a specific tool, Otter, which I know a lot of student journalists use to transcribe interviews. So I don't know if anyone knows this specifically, but if anyone does, feel free to jump in. Does Otter transcriber app protect our transcriptions? Does anyone have any familiarity specifically with Otter's protections?
I can speak on that a little bit more generally, I think. I know that there's a lot of transcription companies out there. A lot of times you have to look at their privacy policy to figure out something like that. But generally in the realm of ed tech companies and school focused AI, typically they're very I don't want to say restrictive. They're very broad in their scanning, but typically they only scan a single platform or a single area. So, for example, Gaggle in our district was configured to only scan Google Suite stuff, so Gmail, Google Drive, Google Docs, that kind of thing. Some other districts might have a setup to only scan Canvas or only scan Office 365. Generally, stuff that I'm saying generally, there are of course exceptions to this, but generally, things like your personal apps, other websites you go to, those wouldn't be scanned, but you would need to check with the privacy policy specifically. But it wouldn't be going to your school district. Yeah, or it wouldn't.
And just as far as the legal side is concerned, so if let's say that you had an interested party in getting some of those transcriptions and getting some of that confidential information that these students are working so hard to maintain, if you had an interested third party like ICE, we are getting a lot of questions about that right now. And if students are interviewing some of their colleagues who are worried about being deported right now, we have a forthcoming guide that will be ready at any point now, I promise, with a great Q&A about this very topic. But if we're taking Otter as an example, so if you're using the school district's Otter account, ICE would be able to subpoena for those records that are maintained by the school district, as opposed to if you have a separate private, whether you as individual students or as the individual newsroom, outside of the bounds of the storage of the school district, then at that point, the subpoena would be coming to you. Don't be scared, reach out to us. We can help you do what's called quashing that subpoena. But in the event that the district isn't as supportive of their student journalists the way that these students had ultimately a very supportive district, and there are plenty around the country, but we don't really want to take that risk, especially in the event that if we have a school district attorney who wants to just surrender everything. And that is that attorney's prerogative to make that advice to the school district, to that Board of Education. So keeping all of these programs, Otter or otherwise, to yourselves as student journalists is, I think, fundamental at this point. But certainly Otter is an example of one of those tools that could be subpoenaed potentially.
Yeah, and that actually pretty much addresses one of the other questions, which was, should we store our content on the school server or would it be better off storing it elsewhere? And so I think we got Jonathan's answer on that, which is that it should be better elsewhere. But I wonder if you all could talk about why it was important to protect the content as it existed on the school servers, or what was your thinking through that process?
yeah, I think the first step for you, if you're worried about whether your content is safe is kind of determining what your school is doing. And for us, it was hard. It's hard to know what's being scanned. And for us, we had to go talk to our administrators. We had our peers, like for example, a whole class of art students got called into the principal's office one day, and Gaggle had scanned some of their artwork that was online, images that were uploaded, and so they got alerted because of that. And once we kind of heard about that, we started asking questions. We said, what's actually being scanned? And once we learned that everything was being scanned, that's how we kind of determined that Gaggle is scanning our work. And so, in your own districts, just keep an eye out, be alert for what your district is using. They might not be using any software, and they might be in the process of buying and implementing software like Gaggle or GoGuardian. So, yeah, just kind of you have to ask questions because oftentimes districts will all be upfront about what they're doing, but try to determine what your district is doing, whether it's public or private, to scan your work, and that's kind of the first step that we took.
Also, to add, I think it's important to know sometimes they just don't know. And that's hard to think about whenever like we think about like, oh, like our school board voted unanimously to pass this, but we never had any like we would constantly ask questions and we would never get answers. There was a point in our during the school year that I can confidently say between us, we were probably the most educated on how Gaggle would work solely through testing. And that is something that's very, very bizarre to me because we essentially, Morgan to talk more about this too, but we would communicate with our building administrators and talk about like, hey, by the way, we're going to put this in our Google Drive. We're going to test this just so you know. Because at the end of the day, the purpose of us going to our district was to resolve this issue. We wanted to work with them. They have historically been supportive of our First Amendment rights. And when we went to them, we were like, just so you know, we're going to put this in Google Docs. Don't be alarmed. It's a test. And those would just keep popping up on their screens. And they would come up into our rooms and be like, oh my gosh, I just saw this, or I just saw this. It was literally just a matter of testing it out, which is really tough because it's a reality that sometimes people who implement things don't actually know how it works. But it was a huge, huge factor in motivating us to keep going.
And not only as far as shifting gears for the district to take this technology away, but they had invested tens of thousands of dollars in a multi-year contract with Gaggle in order to have these services be implemented in the district. And if you could look at the Board of Education minutes for those conversations, and it didn't take a whole lot of time. We investigated that part and sunk all of that money in, and then all of a sudden, when you bring that problem to their attention, like, oh, we just invested all of this money, the taxpayer dollars, into this, and so it's that pressure and that uphill battle that the students had to face as well was the almighty dollar throughout all of this. So further commendation here.
Yeah, exactly. We also, Morgan and I were actually talking about this recently and how like how we began learning about Gaggle and how we began like searching for it. My mind is automatically more inclined to board meeting minutes to how that system worked because that's what I've covered. Morgan is more inclined to like the technology part of it. Jack is more inclined to like the within school aspect. And so we all came with different concerns. I was concerned because I was like, our school district is going through a budget deficit. How are they dropping this money? And Morgan was like, oh my God, like this company, like what is this company doing? And Jack was like, look at the effects of it inside the school. And so I think coming together and talking about that was so important during that time.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say the number was $167,000 over 3 years, which is, and again, an insane amount of money, especially for a school district going through an active budget crisis that literally the year prior had closed multiple elementary schools, pondering closing a middle school. Like, it's a crazy amount of money to spend, and especially once we start testing it, like it feels kind of like we're beta testing it, right? Like we're guinea pigs kind of, and like they're actively pushing out fixes for things that we are notifying them about. There's a couple things like the way we tested it essentially, and this was we were like Natasha said, we were telling our building administrators, which we had good relationships in advance. We didn't want to be nuisances, but the only really way to test it was I came up with a Google Doc of a list of like every not safe for work, inappropriate, violent, et cetera, word I could think of. And we would paste that list wherever we wanted to test it. So emailing it to each other, pasting it in Google Docs, Google Slides, that kind of thing. There was a couple things that I'm thinking of right now. One thing that Gaggle fixed particularly was if an email was flagged by Gaggle with a word that it found that was inappropriate or that was implying violence or something like that, it would not be delivered to the intended recipient, which is a real issue that you can totally imagine a situation in which a student is going through a really hard time at night. They pour their heart out to a teacher in an email asking for help, like as a last resort, and the email doesn't get delivered to the teacher. And the teacher never gets it, the student never gets a response. I mean, you can totally imagine a realistic scenario in which that would happen. And so Gaggle did work on a fix for that, and we believe that's pushed now. But it's very bizarre to be going through a budget crisis, spend that much money, a mortgage on software, and feel like beta testers on it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a powerful example. And I know you all use that in some of your reporting and your editorials. And so maybe that's a good segue into the next question, which is perhaps for Morgan, based on what we just learned about your different approaches to this conversation. But someone was asking about the companies themselves, like Gaggle, and if you all see that an ethical way forward for them to both monitor student safety while also respecting student privacy and these press freedom issues that you all have raised.
Yeah. There are other companies like Gaggle. Gaggle is just one of many companies that are being implemented around the country. A lot of the times when you look into these companies, there are a lot of ethical issues that come up. We looked into Gaggle specifically because that was the one that was affecting us, but a lot of their hiring practices. So just the general way that Gaggle works is if it has a list of thousands of words that it sees as inappropriate or that are concerning. If it sees any of the words in an email, in a Google Doc, in a chat, in calendar, slides, that kind of thing, it will flag the content. That content then gets sent to a human moderator, an employed moderator by Gaggle that works for Gaggle. And then the moderator will review the content for context to see if it's something that is to be concerned or not. And then if they determine that it is something that's concerning, they will escalate it, and it gets sent to school administration that deal with it from there. But there's a lot of issues there. First of all, it's being sent to a third party. So that's an issue number one. Not only, it's important to mention, we've talked a lot about school administrators looking at our work, but not only are school administrators looking at it, a private profit-driven third-party company is looking at it too. That's a giant issue. And looking into these human moderators that are determining things for context, there's a bunch of resources we looked at for these, but there's several interviews with moderators specifically that have worked for Gaggle and that have worked for other companies similar to Gaggle. They get paid extremely low wages, normally around $10 an hour. There's very little background checks done on them. They're getting shown images of potentially students, hurting themselves, nudity, all the things that are getting flagged, real issues that, students notes that where they're really in a tough place mentally, that kind of thing. There's totally, obviously you can see issues there. And another big thing is they are pressed to go through, I think, upwards of 300 cases per hour. So a lot of the times the review for context really doesn't have a purpose, because if they're faced, they're trying to go through as many as possible, they're always going to say something needs to be concerning or something is concerning because they don't want to risk it. So there's a lot of issues there. I think ethically companies need to move forward in a way that they can acknowledge that students do have press rights and do have freedom of expression, and they can't trample that. And they also need to work a lot on focusing on the product more and what they can do to be strictly about safety rather than continuing the downward slide of eroding privacy rights for greater safety as they claim.
Yeah. And I'll add to that as well. I think the First Amendment is not the only thing that's protecting students in public schools. We also kind of went down the road of the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And so in public schools, it's really, really constitutionally tricky to be doing any sort of monitoring of students, which is certainly a balance that's hard, because on the one hand, there's the potential for some dangerous situations to be detected and avoided using the software. That's at least the goal of it, the stated goal. And ultimately, what we landed on with our district is we told them that the best way to keep schools safe and to keep students safe is the way that we've been doing it for years, and that's with building real in-person relationships between students and teachers and administrators and teachers, and so that students always have a trusted adult to talk to. And what we told them is that these software companies are actually actively eroding that trust between students and their principals because students are fearful. I mean, there were crazy rumors going around our school about what Gaggle was doing when they just rolled it out. People were being told to not use the school Wi-Fi, to leave their phones at home. Just students had no idea what was going on, and crazy things were being said. And so they automatically had this distrust of any adult in that school. And that's exactly the opposite of what makes a safe school environment. And so that's honestly ethically the best way to protect students, is just to build relationships with them. And whenever you get into things like monitoring, it's going to be really tricky to protect students' individual rights to privacy. So
Yeah, and AI is a pretty new and shiny sticker to put on a deep-rooted issue within society. It's no lie that teenagers and students are dealing with mental health struggles all over the world. And we believe very deeply in those issues and students getting support for those issues. Oftentimes in high school, we were one of the first ones at the scene whenever we had to report something. I know Morgan had a situation where he had to report a threat that was made on social media, any of these things. And so not only is the company, and like for us it's questionable, but also like the data has been very questionable. I can't recall specifically what the numbers were, but they had like claimed that they were saving like X amount of suicides a year at our school. And if anyone here studies journalism, you know it's a really big thing we talk about in school, like framing data. It's not always falsifying data that's the problem. A lot of the times it's how it's framed and what labels are put on it. And in that case, it really wasn't that this large amount of students were being saved. It was these amount of students were being flagged essentially under like a high level flag on the scale that Gaggle has.
Yeah,
And
that's
I also, sorry,
good.
I wanted to mention about there's a really big focus that we've been making on relationships between administrators and students. And then I also kind of want to connect that with the level of misinformation and the lack of correct information that goes around with these software specifically. So Gaggle was implemented in our school right before Thanksgiving break in 2023. And there was no email by the district. There was nothing. So the only information we had about it is that we had an article in the local paper saying that the school district approved it, the board approved it, but there was no indication by the district to any of the students that it was going to be implemented. And then words started to spread as, and rumors started to go about, like Natasha said, people were scared to turn on their phones, or Jack said people were scared to turn on their phones. There were teachers saying, don't connect to the Wi-Fi, don't plug your phone into your computer, it'll scan everything, all this information. And from the district, in the meantime, there's radio silence. And so then this continues, this multiplies with issues of art students getting pulled down to the office. And so looking at this holistically, you can totally see a student who doesn't have much experience, they're a freshman or something like that. They don't know any of this stuff about Gaggle or anything like that. They don't know what's going on. They have been told that there's software that's scanning everything they do, that knows everything about their online life. Well, no matter their opinion on it, they know that everything's being scanned. So why would they go to their administrator if they think that everything's being scanned? And additionally, there's examples of students who think that administrators are the ones that are implementing this at the school level. And so there's a complete erosion of trust, not by the fault of the school administrators, but there's an erosion of trust between students and school administrators, where students no longer trust school administrators with the things that they might bring to them. Like Natasha said, I brought forward a credible threat of violence in schools last year because I had a built relationship with this administrator. The threat was dealt with. It was not a real threat, but the police went to the student's house. Everything's good now. But that's only possible when you have robust relationships that you've spent time building. And so if those relationships are eroded and degraded by software like this and misinformation, it's a real issue.
And just to take that one step further of Morgan's thoughts about that trust, that relationship that we are hoping that our students are developing with their administrators and teachers. As a reminder, teachers are mandatory reporters. Administrators are mandatory reporters. And so if students wind up wanting to come to that trusted adult and to share some of those things, yeah, it might get to a certain point where they need to flag, that teacher needs to flag this as a potential issue that we might have a student in crisis, where that entire process is going to be thwarted if this erosion of trust, as Morgan describes it, happens.
Excellent. So we do have a few more questions. Try to get through as many as we can. Well, first of all, someone in the chat, I'll make sure that you all get the full message here, but someone in the chat was involved in writing the Kansas law 40 years ago for student press rights and is very excited to see you all using it today. So that is always really cool. Someone asked, can you give examples of other schools that have reached out to you about Gaggle or other software at their schools? So I assume you've probably heard from student journalists across the country.
Yeah, I'll speak to this one. We honestly have had, when we started working with Gaggle, we kind of predicted that it would become a nationwide issue very quickly. And in some ways it did. We had a reporter from the New York Times a couple months ago reach out to us because they were writing a story on basically the exact issue that we faced with a software called GoGuardian. You can check out that piece in the New York Times, but she had talked to students across the country who were also being monitored in their districts. And so, yeah, there's certainly these. I mean, there's stats and there's data on this, but these companies are not uncommon, and they're also almost certainly the future because, as Natasha said, it seems like a shiny new band-aid on an issue that they are very invested in solving. And so, yeah, there's certainly other school districts and other students around the country who are dealing with these same issues.
Excellent. And so you all kind of each introduced what you're studying these days, and we were kind of chatting before we got started here. And Jack, for example, is studying engineering, which isn't necessarily pulling from your journalism skills, or maybe it does. But I'm curious what lessons or skills you've taken from this advocacy experience, and how has that impacted your goals, your perspectives, your aspirations?
I guess I'll go first really briefly. I think it really showed us that adults aren't scary and that speaking to people in power is important. And that oftentimes you might know more about an issue than they do. And honestly, they usually have good intentions and they want to help you, but they just don't know what they're doing. And so, yeah, it's really helpful to just send those emails, go to their office, knock on the door. If you have concerns, if you have questions, just reach out, just get the ball rolling, and important things will happen.
Yeah, so I think, like what I said earlier, it's really important that it's also really scary to understand they don't always have the answers. And you have to go through the system of checks and balances to double check things, to make sure things are correct, and understand that like adults are not scary. They're also human, and sometimes things are put in place that shouldn't be put in place. We were very lucky to be under advisors and be in a school district in a town that very much harbored this level of like student advocacy and standing up for ourselves and being able to like stand up and say, you know what, this isn't right. This shouldn't be happening. And so using those skills was very important for us to understand. Like we kept reminding ourselves, like, no matter how many times they tell us, like, only you have this problem, or oh, so you don't care about mental health. Oh, so this, we kept reminding ourselves there are arguments to be had, and there's also arguments not to be had. And by that, I mean there were statements that were made, there was questions that we got that we had to remind ourselves why we were doing what we did. And remember, just like this is what we're fighting for. We're not fighting against mental health. We're not doing any of this. Our problems are completely separate. And for me, I think That really is what started my interest in like media law. And like today, like I'm studying legal studies at Northwestern because I hope to go into media law because it really showed me a lot of the processes and some of the failures of how media law and like press rights are being handled today in society.
I just wanted to say one of my big takeaways that I've really thought about since this has all happened is just really it's so important to pursue anything that you see as being an issue. So this, I mean, all of this started because I literally there was a copy of the Lawrence Journal World, the paper in town lying on the coffee table, and I saw the article about the surveillance software Gaggle, and I sent it to Jack Tell, and I was like, maybe we should look into this. And that, this has all started this. And another thing is just the importance of teaching press rights to students and just being aware of civics and press rights and the how important a free press is. And a lot of the times, it's not just that they're being taught. It's there's so many examples where, as I said, like our issues with Gaggle and then the Shawnee Mission North case with the camera being taken away. Not only are students have to learn these rights, whether they're being assigned as an assignment or they're getting their camera taken away or their notes are being scanned. So a lot of the times it's so vital that everyone is aware of the importance of a free press and can do everything they can to defend it, because you have to defend it a lot of the times, even if you're not prepared to, or even if you don't know. But a lot of the times you're forced into a situation where your rights are being violated and you need to step up and defend them.
Not just to teach students about press rights, but to teach the adults, I think is what you folks are saying as well. I mean, I remember early on in this process, you were in meetings with not only your administrators, but the district's attorney who's telling you these things. And guess what? His area of practice is very niche when it comes to school districts. He basically is there to make sure that the school district is able to hire and fire the right sort of people. He doesn't know about press rights for students. He doesn't understand, he likely doesn't understand copyright. You all were making copyright arguments to a fully grown adult who had gone to law school, and you all understood these things better than he did. And again, more applause.
Yeah, and actually that is a perfect segue into the next question, which still kind of continues the same theme of dealing with adults who maybe didn't have the same perspectives as you all. Someone was asking specifically about that dismissiveness from the school attorney and what your reactions were to that.
Yeah, so for me, this thing itself with our school attorney was something that was like unfathomable to me. I was simply in awe, like I was in shock every moment of it. I don't think I still look back at it and I'm like, oh my God, that actually happened. To paint the picture, it was essentially, I want to say at our second meeting, it was 12 or 13 of our district officials, like the highest ranked district officials in our school district, sitting in a room, glass walls on half of it, and then us with our journalism advisor and our film teacher. And they kept making legal arguments, like David Cunningham was making legal arguments towards us. And previously, before this, we had actually asked to have the Student Press Law Center on the phone and to answer questions because this is after we drafted our letter of demand. And so those like points that the SPLC articulated obviously come from people like Jonathan who are experienced in the legal field. Like we are student journalists, we do research and we advocate, but I did not go to law school. Like I can't tell you exactly what number this law is or where this goes. And so we got hit with this, like we were asking to have them on the phone and we got denied. They told us we couldn't have the SPLC on the phone with us to answer questions about a demand letter. And then when we went to the meeting with these people who had their doctorates, had their PhDs, were professionals in this field, and we were 17, 18 years old at the time, they had their attorney and they would say, well, this part of your argument is incorrect. This part of your argument is incorrect. This part of your argument is incorrect. In which, whenever we were saying, like, whoa, like you told us we couldn't bring anyone here to explain these to you, like, we don't have the qualifications to sit here and argue this back and forth. It was really, really frustrating. I had to call a 5-minute timeout because I was so in shock, like, what is going on? Um, and I think ultimately, also with this issue of how Gaggle works and how invasive it is for students and how scary it can be, the art students got pulled out of class, some of them with a security guard. We were facing like a Kansas Board of Education attorney in the room telling us we were wrong. All of this felt like a huge intimidation tactic for us not to say anything. And it really just, for me, it just really made me angry. And I think my journalism class, like my advisor's on this right now, and they can attest to how angry I was as to why are we being put in this position? What is going on? Um, but luckily, like we were people who were taught to be like unapologetically loud, and we had that slight level of backbone there kind of at the time. But not everyone is granted that privilege of being under an advisor who teaches us to speak up for ourselves and in a town that does so. So
Yeah.
that's my take.
Yeah, and I'll add, like when they brought their lawyer to that meeting and were outlining why we were wrong and this, that, and the other way, they were largely bluffing. Like they were largely not responding to the issues that we brought, and they were just trying to kind of speak their legalese and avoid the issue entirely and get us to go back to the classroom and settle down. And so yeah, we that was definitely a meeting that kind of rocked us, and we definitely spoke to the SPLC again after that and some lawyers after that just to make sure we were on the right foot, and the process continued after that. But that's certainly something that we had to face, is just some intimidation with some legal speak and some lawyers on the other side.
And I just wanted to add on to that. I just think it's really important to mention that during this whole process, like we were completely confident the entire way through that we knew that something was wrong here and that we had questions that we deserved answers to. But it's really important to remember that throughout anything, if you ever start to question authority or question school administrators, and you know that your rights are being violated, they are not going to respond to you with, oh, like, okay, we'll stop that. Like you are going to receive enormous amounts of pushback no matter where you go. And it's incredibly important to remember that people can violate your rights and be nice about it and be pleasant and civil about it and still be violating your rights. People can violate your rights and be rude about it and abhorrent and make you not want to talk to them about it. But you need to continue to fight, and you will receive pushback. But generally when you are receiving pushback on something and you know that you are in the pursuit of defending yourself, you are completely in the right.
That's such a good point. And you all talked about the privilege that you had being from a good journalism program, and I believe that must be your advisor who just posted in the chat that they're so proud of you and Lawrence, as they should be. Um, Curious if is that what you attribute to knowing about SPLC and about these laws, about all the different pieces that came together? Was it because you had such a good journalism program and an advisor, or how else did you learn about these resources?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think most of the credit there is to our advisor, Miss Sloan, and just all the work that she's put in that journalism program. And yeah, she was the one who directed us to all the resources that we had, including the SPLC. So that is certainly a critical component of any good staff, is just good leadership and knowing which resources to reach out to.
Yeah, she really is the best. I went to a different high school across town for 3 years, and we went through so many different advisors. So there was a point where I didn't have an advisor. I'd be traveling across town to go to her to ask questions, and I had actually gotten in contact with the SPLC earlier about a separate issue, and I attribute that to they're having trustworthy adults around me. Also, if anyone's ever gone to like an NSPA conference or anything, the Student Press Law Center always has a booth. You guys are always doing a session. I have way too many stickers. And so yeah, just keep your eyes peeled.
I love that. And the next one I believe is in Seattle in April. So if anybody's going to be in Seattle, make sure to go find Jonathan.
We will be there. So
Love that.
yeah.
Love that so much. So we do have more questions that we can't get to. I'm really sorry, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I would say if you have more questions, reach out to SPLC on the legal hotline. Jonathan can answer them there. If you have questions for Natasha, Jack, or Morgan, send them my way, and I'm happy to get them in touch with you. Um, clearly they know exactly what they're talking about. So these are the experts that you should be talking to about these issues. Anything that you all want to say to kind of wrap up?
Yeah, please don't be afraid to reach out to us. We understand what it feels like to be scared and vulnerable and be in the situation where you feel like everyone has the answers except for me, which I'm going to tell you a secret, they actually don't have the answers. You're just the one questioning it. And good for you. But yeah, just feel free to reach out to any of us and just keep doing what you're doing.
Excellent note to end on. Jack or Morgan, anything else to add?
I'm just going to echo exactly what Natasha said. Yeah, just please feel free to reach out if any of these questions, if you want these questions answered, just reach out to any of us through Josh or through Jonathan. We're more than happy to talk to you and answer.
Yeah, and yeah, just thanks to the SPLC for helping us through this process and for making this Zoom call possible. And yeah, thank you all for attending.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for indulging us and giving us your presentation tonight and answering all these great questions. Jonathan, any last comments from you before we wrap up?
No, just again, no question is too small for the hotline. That's how all of this starts. That's how Natasha came to us originally, and things bloom from there. But really hope to hear from you all. This is how we get in touch and we figure out that gaggle is even an issue in the first place. We wouldn't have known in the first place. So absolutely looking forward to hearing from you.
Absolutely. And I hope that they've inspired everyone to do something big or small for Student Press Freedom Day. Clearly, what they've done for Student Press Freedom is big, but even small steps can make a difference. So, check out studentpressfreedom.org. It has a lot of different ideas for Student Press Freedom Day, ways that you can get involved. And yeah, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Thanks, folks.
Thank you all for tuning in.